Dimir Midrange has been just shy of the top spot in the standard metagame for a while. Its formula of cheap interaction, powerful card advantage engines, and tempo-based creatures make the midrange deck viable in a world governed by synergy and some of the highest efficiency cards that Magic has ever seen. Dimir Midrange also has a spot in a lot of players' hearts as a fun and rewarding deck to play, including my own. One of the reasons why I was one of the only 2 people to register it at the 2025 Magic the Gathering World Championship, where I ended with a top 32 finish. But that's a story, possibly, for another time. Despite what everyone else in the tournament thought, I believe that Dimir still has a place in this format, and if anything, has only improved as the metagame has evolved. That's why, as one of the best Dimir pilots in the world, I want to give a full breakdown of my list and how I play against whatever my opponents throw at me. Whether you're new to Magic or looking to pick up Dimir for your next RCQ, here's the complete guide to the most underrated deck in the format. First things first, let's take a look at the list. Starting with the 1-drops, Cecil, Dark Knight, and Spyglass Siren are very efficient threats for their mana cost. Cecil especially can be a nightmare for aggressive creature decks looking to get in against your otherwise low toughness creatures and dinky flyers. In the 2-drop slot, Bloodpit's Drowner and Deep Cavern Bat are creatures that are great at getting in damage and triggering your Enduring Curiosity, while also providing you with interaction for whatever your opponents are trying to do. Deep Cavern Bat can break up synergies and force your opponents to use removal spells that they would otherwise prefer to save for your larger creatures, while Floodpit's Drowner is an incredibly efficient threat that perfectly enables Kaito while also tapping down creatures much larger than itself. In the 3-drop slot, Tashana's Tidebinder is a flash threat that could answer any triggered or activated ability, and gives Dimir an answer to threats that can otherwise be hard to deal with, notably Monument to Endurance. Creature of the Schism is another roadblock for more aggressive decks that can also be hard for a lot of the red removal to answer, and when it's on board for more than a few turns, can be almost impossible for your opponents to dig themselves out of the hole of value that it puts them in. Kaito, Bane of Nightmares isn't technically a 3-drop, but when it's at its best, you're using it as one. Curving out into a Kaito can be an unstoppable tempo play for anyone not equipped to immediately remove it from the board. Rounding out the top end of the deck is Enduring Curiosity and the Unagi of Kyoshi Island. Enduring Curiosity is an almost unkillable 4-drop threat that draws absurd amounts of cards and puts on the pressure like nothing else in the deck. The Unagi is there to give a little bit of an edge against Izzet Lessons, Scam, and Looting, where it can thrive as a hard-to-answer threat that keeps you even or ahead on cards. While the number of interactive spells may look small, with only 6 removal spells and 2 counter spells, remember that Kaito, Drowner, and Tashana's Tidebinder can all double as temporary removal in a pinch. Right now, I have 2 1-mana removal spells to deal with Llanowar Elves, Gran, and any other offensive creatures in the format. Currently have a split of Stab and Tragic Trajectory, as each is slightly better in very specific situations, but mostly they're the same card. For my 2-mana removal, I also have a split between 2 Bitter Triumph and 2 Shoot the Sheriff. Bitter Triumph can be a clean answer to opposing Kaitos and Raw Crackling Wits that can otherwise pose a problem if not immediately answered by a Tidebinder. Shoot the Sheriff is a mostly unconditional kill spell with almost no drawback, and just a very efficient answer to a lot of the big threats in the format. Phantom Interference is a card that I did not have in my Worlds deck list. With the amount of slower blue-red decks in the format, primarily Izzet Lessons, a 2-mana counterspell can stop problem permanents from coming down before they ever become an issue, and the spree mode is surprisingly relevant in a number of matchups. The mana base is also an integral part of Dimir Midrange's game plan. Originally, I had 2 Restless Reef and only 3 Multiversal Passage, but with the current speed of the format, I've found that having a tap land can often be more detrimental than the amount that using it as a creature comes up. The other slight difference I have in my mana base is the lack of Fountain Port for a total of 3 Soulstone Sanctuaries. You need to end games quickly with how fast some of the decks in the format can take over a game with their late game engines, and Soulstone Sanctuary does a great job at this. Not only does it get pumped by Kaito's +1 emblem, but it also allows you to do something with your mana if your opponent does not want to play into Tidebinder or any of your counterspells. For the sideboard, I have 1 Tragic Trajectory as an additional answer to cheap mana dorks, 2 Duress for any deck running a variety of non-creature spells. Intimidation Tactics is great against all of the green decks as well as Reanimator, and Soul Guide Lantern pulls double duty in the Reanimator and Izzet Lessons matchup. Annul is mainly there to counter problem permanents like Artist Talent and Monument to Endurance for a nice tempo advantage, and the third Preacher helps shore up some of the aggro matchups. Fourth Tidebinder often comes in for whatever your next worst card is, as it's very versatile. In matchups where Kaito comes out, having the additional 3-drop is also very helpful. Vren is one of the cards in the sideboard that I am least sure about. I was having a lot of success with it up against Izzet looting, as well as some of the blue-green aggro decks, but with those decks falling off a little bit more, it could be easily replaced by a Spell Pierce, Negate, or possibly even a Wanshi Tong, or the landfall decks cropping up. Unagi of Kyoshi Island, obviously there, 4 blue-red variants, and 3 Day of Black Sun help you stay ahead on board against some of the decks that just spawn creatures incredibly quickly. Day of Black Sun plus Vren is also a nice combo when you could get it off, but can be a little tricky. Before we get into each individual matchup, I want to take a moment to thank Heavy Play for sponsoring both me and the rest of Team Rampant Growth. If you're looking for high-quality deck boxes, sleeves, playmats, and more, go to heavyplay.com/rampant for 10% off all your favorite deck accessories and for a chance to support the team. Also, check out the Heavy Play LLC YouTube channel. There's already some great standard content on there featuring yours truly, so go show some support so we can make more great content. Let's start with the current top dog of the format, Izzet Lessons. Lessons gets its name from the powerful Lesson synergy cards from the new Avatar set, especially Grand and Accumulate Wisdom. It then backs them up with other reasonable lessons from the set to get to the 3 in the graveyard required to turn on both Grand and Wisdom. Lessons also utilizes the core of Storm Chaser's talent plus Boomerang basics for incredibly fast starts, and then backs up their long game with the combination of Artist Talent and Monument to Endurance, which the deck can dig to very quickly. On the Dimir side, there are a couple of keys to the matchup. Number 1, kill or nullify Grand on site. If you lack a removal spell, leaving back a 2-power blocker makes them have to slow down to kill it, rather than deploy threats or stop attacking with the old lady, both of which give you more time before they get their engine online. Cecil is the best at doing this, but a Spyglass Siren with a map on it works in a pinch. The second key is to get a sticky threat down, usually Kaito, which they have a hard time dealing with as they have no direct Planeswalker burn, or the Unagi of Kyoshi Island. Curiosity can also be good if you can bait out combustion techniques with a Preacher of the Schism or Cecil earlier on. The last key to success here is stopping them from getting their late game engine online. They really want to get the trifecta of mana reduction, Artist Talent, and Monument in play, which lets them dig through their deck very fast and get a quick kill no matter the board state. You can stop them with a timely Bat or Tidebinder, as well as by keeping the Grand off the field and forcing a talent level up, which can occasionally be too slow. Taking an Accumulate Wisdom at just the right time with your Deep Cavern Bat can also keep your opponents from having the amount of spells necessary to go off, and countering the level up of either of their talents slows them down a considerable amount. I like to board in a lot of cheap interaction. Soul Guide Lantern and Annul are the best cards here as they stop your opponent's main game plans for just 1 mana. The Unagi is also good, but it's a lot easier for this deck to answer than the other blue-red decks in the format. Don't be afraid to use your Soul Guide Lantern proactively to clear the graveyard and stop mana reduction from Grand, as the tempo play of your opponent responding to the sacrifice ability can be brutal. Also, using an Annul on a Storm Chaser's talent is completely reasonable, and be careful when duressing any opponent with a Monument in play. But even then, you can use this to your advantage if you have a Tidebinder to shut down their Monument for good. I board out Flood Pit's Drowner as your worst interactive creature, and then a couple Curiosity as it's the easiest engine for them to answer. With Flood Pits coming out, Kaito also becomes more of a 4-drop, so not getting too caught up there is important. Overall, this is a tricky matchup, but of the 3 Izzet decks in the format, it's the one I'd most like to see on the other side of the field. Izzet Scam plays a similar game to Izzet Lessons, but rather than getting value with Accumulate Wisdom and Sticky Permanence, it uses Quantum Riddler and Thunder Trap Trainer in tandem with Splash Portal to stay ahead on cards. The Scam matchup plays out similarly to the Lessons matchup with a few key differences, but overall, I found it a lot harder. Game 1, their plan is easier to disrupt as removal spells do a great job mitigating the value they can get off of Splash Portal. However, it is still very difficult to stay even on cards with them. The main reason that it gets a lot harder is Torch the Tower. Not only does it cleanly answer Curiosity for just 1 mana, but it can also be combined with an attacker or a second Torch to clear a Kaito. Against Lessons, you don't have to worry about down-ticking Kaito to keep an Otter in check. but against the Scam deck, this often results in your Kaito immediately biting the dust. This makes it harder to find a time to stick a Kaito, however, with the right timing, the ninja can still run away with the game. Riddler is another card that can be very scary just due to the sheer amount of cards it draws. But you do have a lot of tempo-positive answers to it. Shoot the Sheriff and Flood Pit's Drowner both do a great job at cleaning it up, especially if they have to tap out to hardcast it. Sideboarding is also slightly different here as the Soul Guide Lanterns and Annuls don't come in. The Scam deck sometimes has slow draws, so I like to bring in the Preachers to capitalize on this and force them to answer it without adding to their own board. The Unagi is phenomenal here, but be careful of Get Out, which can cleanly answer it. Don't be afraid to slam it if they ever tap out, unless you know a Roaring Furnace can come down immediately, as that is really the only clean way they have to get it off the field. Drowner is just okay here, and Curiosity is your worst threat, so I board a couple of each of those out. But with more interaction and powerful creatures on your side, the Curiosity does get a bit better post-board. Tragic Trajectory is by far the worst removal spell, as Stab can at least get a timely kill on a Thundertrap trainer in response to a Splash Portal. Overall, try to play a slower game in this matchup and prevent your opponents from getting too much value with their Splash Portals. But if you see an opportunity to stick a Kaito or Unagi, don't hesitate. Other small tips here are to almost always uptick your Kaito the turn it comes down, as this will give you essentially more answers to a Riddler later on, and don't be afraid to use a removal spell on your own Curiosity to keep the Coastal Piracy effect. The third and final Izzet deck you'll likely play against is Izzet Looting. The deck takes advantage of large creatures that loot, hence the name, and the late game plan of Riddler and Winter Night stories, along with, of course, Boomerang Basics and Stormchaser's Talent. Unlike the other two Izzet decks, you take the more controlling side in this matchup. Their high density of cheap threats often makes your Kaito a glorified removal spell, and their creatures outclass your Flood Pit's Drowner. Your best cards in this matchup are removal spells, Cecil and Preacher of the Schism, the two creatures being difficult to answer, and blocking insanely well, allowing you to fly over with bats and Spyglass Sirens. Some tips for this matchup are to not bank on your Kaito living, and just try to get the most value out of it, especially with Frostcliff Siege making it almost impossible to block. Another tip is to basically never attack with Cecil, unless they are very, very far behind. Doesn't really help in a damage race, and even if it flips, Boomerang Basics can really blow you out. Also, pay attention to the timing and power of their creatures entering to prevent Winter Night stories from flashing back, and try to kill the Riddler in response to the draw trigger if they have one or fewer cards in hand. Like Scam, the looting deck also has access to Torch the Tower, but with no Furnace and them caring about their creatures a lot more, they have less tools to bargain with, making your Curiosity slightly more effective. Trading a Curiosity off in combat can also give you access to the better half of the card with no fear of Torch the Tower. For sideboarding, I have found that a full control plan is the best way to go. Day of Black Sun lines up nicely against their Otter tokens and bevy of 2-drops, but can look a little awkward against a Frostcliff Siege. The other large creatures also come in to support your slower game plan, and Intimidation tactics can snipe a Riddler at the perfect time. I take out Drowner and Kaito, as the Planeswalker is very hard to keep on the field, and Flood Pit's Drowner just does not line up against any of their ground creatures. Stab also misses out on a lot of their cards, so I board it out here. Some newer versions of the looting deck are running 4 Frostcliff Siege, so Annul may be a card to consider there, but I won't recommend it without testing it a little bit first. In my opinion, the Mirror is one of the most fun matchups to play. Some games end quickly with a nice curve into Kaito or Curiosity on the play taking over the game. However, a lot of games end in top deck wars as both players have good answers to each other's threats. Tempo is the most important thing here, and being the one to keep drawing cards off a Curiosity or Kaito also matters a lot. Ticking up Kaito is the best mode early on, as it makes your Soulstone Sanctuaries absolute monsters down the line, and allows you to tick down twice, with each essentially being a free removal spell. Ticking up the Kaito also helps to prevent them removing it immediately with a couple 2-mana flash creatures, a Curiosity, or a Restless Reef. Your best cards are Spyglass Siren, which jams up the board nicely and gives a lot of value, Enduring Curiosity, which can be hard to kill and takes over a game very fast, and Tashana's Tidebinder, which has almost more targets than it knows what to do with. This is also the one matchup I miss the second Restless Reef, as the extra body matters a lot against Kaito and in a longer game. Post-board, I have found the worst cards to be Preacher of the Schism, which gets absolutely blown out by Flood Pit's Drowner and Kaito, and Deep Cavern Bat, which oftentimes is just a 2-mana Thoughtseize that eventually gives them the card back. A couple are fine as a speed bump against Kaito and Curiosity, but overall, having too many of the card can be a liability. I board in the 4th Tidebinder, 3rd cheap removal spell, and a new Nagi, which can help rebuy some lost tempo, and is a hard-to-answer threat that is usually bigger than the rest of the board. I've also been trying 1 Day of Black Sun as a way to get you back into games you were behind, but I'm still a little bit unsure on the card. If you're struggling in the mirror and want a little more in the board, I recommend Feybloom Trick, which is an incredible tempo play and is hard to trade up against. Try to maximize value out of every card you have, and you'll find yourself doing a lot better in the matchup. Simic aggro has been getting less and less play, but there are still a lot of decks around looking to take advantage of Elves and Badgermilk Cub. And playing against all of these stacks is pretty similar. Try to restrict your opponent on mana with removal and Flood Pit's Drowner in the early turns, and then get a Curiosity down to get ahead on cards so you can keep mowing through their board with interaction. Kaito is also at its worst here, as they go too wide for it to effectively handle their board. Another important card in these matchups is Deep Cavern Bat, as they have almost no removal and no ways to block it. Try to use your bats the turn before they play their Ouroboros or other bomb, and you can run away with a lot of games by putting their Mana Dork deck into a position of having to top deck. Also, try and use your Cecil defensively to curb early aggression, and trade up with larger creatures. Paw Patch Recruit is one card that can be a headache in this matchup, but your creatures do a good job trading as long as they don't have an Ouroboros in play. Sideboarding is pretty straightforward. Kaito is bad, and you need Siren a lot less when you don't need to enable the ninja. The Wraths and more defensive creatures come in to stop them from reaching a critical mass on their own board state. Make sure you're maximizing the value you are getting from the Wraths here, as they are by far the best card. Taking some damage or deploying your own creature into it often gets you more value than you would lose from playing your best card too early. The biggest tips here are to abuse your Deep Cavern Bats and make sure you always have an answer to an Ouroboros, as that's the one card that can really run away with the game on their side. In the process of making this video, even more new blue-green Ouroboros decks have popped up. These decks focus on getting an Ouroboros and as many Badgermole Cubs into play as fast as possible, with tons of Mana Dorks, Nature's Rhythms, and Mockingbird. While this version of the blue-green deck does have more grind to it, Dimir's game plan does not change in the matchup. Deny mana early, and try and stop those pesky Ouroboros as soon as you can. Green Landfall is the new face of green ramp decks in the current meta, and I've struggled against it more than with the Badgermole Cub decks of the past, in part because I have less experience playing against it. Your overall plan is pretty similar, however their deck has a lot more individually powerful cards and value, which makes it harder to put them in a position they are forced to top deck. I have found the best route to victory is getting a Curiosity on board and trying to answer all of their threats while poking them in the air with a Deep Cavern Bat. Tidebinder and Deep Cavern Bat, in addition to the 2 mana removal, are your best interactive tools, but can struggle if your opponent gets off to a very fast start. I board the same as I do versus Airbending and Simic, but I am interested in trying some new cards in certain slots. I'm unsure on how good Vren and Day of Black Sun are with some of the blue-green decks and Izzet Looting becoming less popular. While I haven't done a ton of testing on this yet, if you're interested in trying some new cards in those slots or are struggling with Landfall a lot, I recommend Wan Shi Tong as a crazy hate card against them, and Intimidation Tactics to preemptively take their strongest threat. There are a few slightly less meta matchups to talk about, but before that, I want to clarify that even though I am confident in a lot of my card choices and the playstyles I enact, innovation at the highest level of Magic never stops. There's always ways to improve each and every deck against the rest of the metagame, and I'm sure my blue-black list will change in the upcoming weeks. Also, if your local meta differs from the professional or online metas, my list is probably not going to give you the best shot. Keep trying out new cards and iterating on the deck, and you'll find the list that suits you and your meta best. If you have any cards you're liking a lot in certain matchups, I would love to hear about them in the comments down below. Now, let's talk about 3 of your best matchups to round out the video. Sultai Reanimator is a fairly slow deck that uses the powerful combo of Bringer of the Last Gift and Superior Spider-Man for essentially a 4-mana Living End. Supports this with powerful discard outlets, self-mill, and removal. While very powerful, the Reanimator deck can be exploited fairly easily, and Dimir has a lot of great tools to do this. Your best cards game 1 are Phantom Interference and Tishana's Tidebinder, both of which stop an early combo and can add more pressure to the field. You also have Deep Cavern Bat to slow your opponent down, and Enduring Curiosity, which is very hard for them to fully answer. Their best tools against you are Harvester of Misery and Awaken the Honored Dead on Kaito, so try not to play into those too much. Kaito barely ever lives, with 4 Bitter Triumph and 4 Awaken the Honored Dead on the opposing side, so this is the one matchup I recommend using the Zero ability almost every time to dig for more effective interaction. While the matchup is close game 1, after sideboarding you get even more tools to throw them off balance. Soul Guide Lantern at 1 mana is incredible, and I found it best to hold until the turn before they can combo, to make it harder for them to preemptively remove with Awaken the Honored Dead, although you do have to look out for Deep Cavern Bat and Intimidation tactics out of the sideboard. You also get access to a 4th Tidebinder and your own Intimidation tactics, which do a great job at nullifying their combo. On top of that, you get to remove the clunky Preachers and the bad cheap removal spells from your deck entirely. Couple tips for this matchup: make sure you hold your Tidebinders for the best possible moment, and remember it can counter the 1st and 3rd chapters of Awaken the Honored Dead. Overall, this matchup is heavily in your favor, but still losable if you stumble and give them the board advantage, or if you play too aggressively into their removal. The Artifacts matchup is another where Tidebinder absolutely carries. It nullifies their game plan of making huge creatures with a Simulacrum Synthesizer, while also providing a ton of pressure. The games you lose are the ones you don't have the answers in the right spots, or you run out of gas too quickly. They do have good answers to a Curiosity and Kaito, but your engines almost always get value before their Perilous Snare comes down. The Artifacts deck can struggle against flyers and a wide board, backed up with just a little bit of removal. Your sideboard is also packed full of quality cards here. Annul, which is mainly for the Lessons matchup, is the best possible card here, answering almost anything in their deck for just 1 mana. You also add 3 discard spells, and get to cut those clunky Preachers and bad cheap removal spells yet again. Even if you feel like you're behind, never scoop in this matchup. I've gotten a lot of wins barely crossing the line with exact damage off of my Tidebinders, Flood Pits Drowners, and Soulstone Sanctuaries. Also, try to hold your interaction for their really important cards, like Repurposing Bay and Synthesizer, rather than a Perilous Snare on your Deep Cavern Bat or Cecil. And this matchup should be a breeze. The last matchup I'll go over in this video is the Control matchup. There are a couple of variations of Control in the format now. Azorius, which plays more Wraths and tries to win a very long game with utility lands, card advantage, and a couple of top-end creatures, and the more popular Jeskai deck that tries to burn you out once they get to their Jeskai Revelations and Shikos. Couple important tips for these matchups are trying to keep them off of card advantage spells with bats and counterspells, while also not falling too far behind on land drops. Don't be afraid to play a long game against them, as all of your threats retain their value later into the game, and this can nullify their choice of counterspells in No More Lies. Enduring Curiosity is by far your best card here, as they can't effectively get it off the field. Drowner is also decent as just a 2-drop flash creature, despite not having too many targets. It pressures their removal and threatens to get an early Kaito on the field. For Kaito use, this is another matchup where you want to zero it, as they do have a lot of answers with Get Lost and a couple burn spells to take it down in tandem. You have a few good cards to bring in Duress, Tidebinder, and Unagi, but you'll really need to look out for Voice of Victory and your opponent's Tidebinders coming in. I think the matchup still stays in your favor, but make sure you know what's coming on their side and keep enough removal in to answer the Voice of Victories, as well as the extra creatures they bring in post-board. Try and sneak in as much damage as you can early, and play around removal if they're doing nothing. By holding cards in your hand, you can wait for them to tap out for a threat, and then punish with your suite of flash threats and removal spells you've built up over the past few turns. There are a lot more decks in the format, but I simply can't go over everything without making this video insanely long. With so much intricacy in Magic and the state of Standard right now, I'm sure I missed some important stuff, so if you have any more questions on the deck, be sure to drop them in the comments down below. This video in particular was a lot more work than anything I've put out in the past. I made every graphic and edited it all together, which are both skills I'm currently trying to improve at. So if you enjoyed the video, make sure you leave a like, and if you want to see more stuff like this, let me know and make sure to subscribe. I had a lot of fun making this, and I hope everyone watching learned a little something. With that, have a happy new year, hopefully filled with a lot of Dimir gameplay.